The conference chamber of the Zafkuri High Command stretched like a cathedral of polished obsidian beneath the crimson glow of Orthak Prime's twin suns. Here, where the fate of entire star systems had been decided for 3 millennia, silence held court with the weight of unspoken dread. Commander Veltar Nostek stood at attention before the crescent-shaped tribunal, his 4 arms clasped behind his broad, chitinous back. The battle scars that crisscrossed his deep blue carapace caught the light like silver rivers, each one a testament to conflicts that had forged him into the most decorated war hero in Zektakari history. Yet today, those scars seemed to ache with memories he wished he could forget. The 5 members of the High Command observed him with the cold calculation of apex predators. Their elongated skulls, adorned with ceremonial neural crowns, reflected the chamber's ambient light as they communicated through subsonic frequencies that resonated through the floor like distant thunder. "Commander Nostek," spoke High Marshal Kethvar Holneth, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had never known defeat. "Your request for this emergency session was unprecedented. The Council hopes your revelations justify the urgency." Veltar's mandibles clicked involuntarily, a nervous habit he thought he'd conquered in his youth. Around him, holographic displays showed the current state of the galactic conflict. Red zones spreading like a cancer across the spiral arm, marking territories where the newcomers, the humans, had somehow impossibly carved out footholds against species that had dominated space for eons. "Honored Council," Veltar began, his voice steady despite the storm raging in his chest cavity. "What I must share with you today will challenge everything we believe about warfare, about survival, about the very nature of intelligent life itself." The chamber's atmosphere processors hummed softly, recycling air that suddenly felt too thin. High Marshal Holineth's secondary arms moved in a gesture of impatience, a subtle warning that Veltar's words had better be worth the interruption of their war planning. 3 cycles ago," Veltar continued, "I commanded the 17th Battle Group in what our intelligence designated as a routine pacification mission. The target, a small human colony world called Kepler 42b. Population, roughly 2 million. Defenses, minimal. Expected resistance, negligible. A holographic star map materialized in the center of the chamber, showing the colony world as a small blue dot on the outer rim of human space. It looked insignificant, a mere speck in the vast cosmos that should have fallen within hours of orbital bombardment. "I want to preface what I'm about to tell you," Veltar said, his usually confident tone wavering, "by stating that I have served our empire with honor for 43 cycles. I have led successful campaigns against the Sulmari Confederacy, the Talneth Republic, and the Vorilian Hive Mind. I have never fled from battle. I have never questioned the righteousness of our expansion." He paused, allowing the weight of his credentials to settle over the chamber like a heavy blanket. "But what I witnessed on that world, what those humans did to my forces, what they did to themselves." His voice trailed off as his secondary hands began to tremble, an involuntary response to memories that still haunted his sleep cycles. High Marshal Holineth leaned forward, her predatory instincts suddenly sharp. "Commander, you're beginning to concern this council. Please continue with your report." Veltar activated his neural implant, and the holographic display shifted to show tactical footage from his personal combat recorder. The images were grainy, distorted by electromagnetic interference, but clear enough to reveal the hell that had unfolded on Kepler 42b. "The initial phase proceeded as expected," he said, his voice becoming mechanical, clinical. "Orbital bombardment eliminated their primary defense installations within the first hour. Our landing forces encountered scattered resistance, nothing our battle doctrine couldn't handle. The humans fell back to fortified positions in their major population centers as predicted. The footage showed Sethkari drop ships descending through smoke-filled skies, their sleek forms cutting through the atmosphere like falling stars. Ground forces deployed with military precision, their advanced weaponry cutting through hastily constructed barricades with contemptuous ease. But then, Veltar's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Then something changed. It was subtle at first, reports from squad leaders about unusual human behavior, civilians refusing to evacuate, wounded soldiers continuing to fight with injuries that should have been incapacitating. Children barely past their hatching age, throwing improvised explosives at our heavy armor. The chamber's environmental systems seemed to respond to the growing tension, automatically adjusting the atmospheric composition as stress pheromones began to saturate the air. I initially attributed this to desperation, Veltar continued. Every species fights harder when cornered. But as the battle progressed, I began to realize that what I was witnessing wasn't desperation at all. It was something far more disturbing. High Counselor Zethmus Pelkorth, the eldest member of the tribunal, spoke for the first time since the session began. His voice carried the weight of centuries. Commander, you speak in generalities. This council requires specifics. Show us what you saw. Veltar's mandibles clicked again, more pronounced this time. With visible reluctance, he adjusted the holographic controls, and the display zoomed in on a particular section of the battle footage. The scene showed a human defensive position. A hastily constructed bunker in what appeared to be a civilian hospital complex. Zathkari assault troops had surrounded the position, their plasma weapons easily overwhelming the primitive kinetic firearms of the defenders. This is footage from the Battle of New Geneva Medical Center, Veltar explained. We had cut off their supply lines, destroyed their communications, and eliminated their escape routes. By all tactical calculations, they should have surrendered. The holographic display showed the final moments of the engagement. Human defenders, clearly outnumbered and outgunned, continued firing even as their positions were being systematically destroyed. But what captured the Council's attention wasn't the futile resistance. It was what happened when the humans realized defeat was inevitable. Watch carefully, Veltar said, his voice heavy with something that might have been grief. This is where my understanding of intelligent behavior ended. The footage showed a human medic identifiable by the red cross on her uniform moving among the wounded. But instead of treating injuries, she was injecting something into the necks of the dying soldiers. One by one, the wounded humans began to rise, their movements jerky but purposeful, returning to their weapons with expressions that no longer seemed entirely sane. Combat stimulants, High Marshal Holnath observed. Desperate but not unprecedented. That's what I thought too. Veltar replied, until I saw the toxicology reports later. Those weren't stimulants, Honored Marshal. They were neural inhibitors, drugs specifically designed to suppress the brain's ability to feel pain, fear, or self-preservation. The chamber fell into absolute silence. Even the environmental systems seemed to pause their endless cycling. They were voluntarily turning themselves into living weapons. Veltar continued, his voice barely audible, sacrificing their sanity, their basic survival instincts, their very humanity, for a few more minutes of resistance against an enemy they couldn't possibly defeat. The holographic footage continued, showing the final assault on the medical center. The humans fought with a ferocity that bordered on supernatural, soldiers with missing limbs continuing to fire, medics who had injected themselves returning to treat the wounded even as their own neural systems shut down. Children who couldn't have been more than 10 cycles old dragging ammunition to gun positions while singing what their translators identified as lullabies. But that wasn't the worst of it, Veltar said, and for the first time since beginning his report, his military bearing cracked. The worst part came when we finally breached their defenses. The display shifted to show the interior of the medical center. Safkari soldiers advanced through corridors lined with human wounded, their weapons trained on targets that should have been helpless. But as they moved deeper into the facility, something became horrifyingly clear. They had rigged the entire building. Veltar whispered. Every wounded human, every medical bed, every piece of equipment connected to a network of improvised explosives. The moment our forces reached the central treatment area, the footage erupted in white light as the medical center detonated with enough force to take out 3 city blocks. The blast wave sent debris flying for kilometers, creating a crater where thousands of humans had chosen to die rather than be captured. 47 of my best soldiers were killed in that explosion, Veltar said, his voice now completely devoid of emotion. But that wasn't what broke something inside me. What broke me was the realization that every human in that building, the wounded, the medical staff, the children, they all knew what was going to happen. They chose to die. All of them. Without hesitation. High Counselor Pelkorth's ancient voice cut through the silence like a blade. Suicide attacks are not unknown in warfare, Commander. Desperate species off. This wasn't desperation. Beltar's voice cracked like breaking stone. Don't you understand? This was calculated. Planned. They had contingencies for their contingencies, backup plans for their backup plans. Every single engagement followed the same pattern. Escalating sacrifice, increasing brutality, complete disregard for their own survival in favor of inflicting maximum damage on our forces. The chamber's lighting seemed to dim as the weight of his words settled over the assembled council. I studied their communication intercepts, Beltar continued. Do you know what they called it? Their term for this tactical doctrine. He paused, allowing the question to hang in the air like a toxic cloud. They called it going hard, as if turning themselves into living bombs was just another military option, no different from calling for air support or requesting reinforcements. High Marshal Holiness' forearms moved in a complex gesture of unease. Commander, these are disturbing revelations, but surely you're not suggesting that this single engagement represents— It wasn't a single engagement, Beltar interrupted, his voice gaining strength as he finally began to release the burden he'd been carrying. It was every engagement, every battle, every skirmish. For 6 months I watched my soldiers face an enemy that seemed to grow more dangerous the closer they came to defeat. The holographic display began cycling through additional footage. Dozens of battles, hundreds of encounters, thousands of moments where humans chose death over surrender, pain over retreat, sacrifice over survival. They turned their children into soldiers. They turned their wounded into weapons. They turned their very cities into traps designed to kill as many of our forces as possible before falling. And the worst part, the part that still wakes me up screaming in the middle of my sleep cycle, is that it worked. Beltar's scarred carapace reflected the crimson light of the chamber as he delivered the words that would change everything. In 6 months of fighting, my battle group, the most elite force in the Zathkari military, was reduced from 12,000 soldiers to less than 3,000. Not because we couldn't win battles, but because every victory cost us more than we could afford to lose. The humans didn't defeat us through superior technology or tactics. They defeated us by being willing to pay prices that no sane species would ever consider acceptable. The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to have weight. The council members sat frozen, their ancient minds struggling to process implications that challenged fundamental assumptions about the nature of intelligent warfare. Honored Council, Beltar said, his voice now steady with the conviction of terrible truth. I stand before you today not to report a military defeat, but to warn you of something far more dangerous. The humans aren't just another species to be conquered. There's something fundamentally different, something that evolution on their death world has shaped into the perfect killing machine. He paused, allowing his words to settle before delivering the revelation that would haunt them all. And now they're coming for our core worlds. The chamber's emergency lighting suddenly activated, bathing everything in pulsing red as communication arrays throughout the facility began receiving priority transmissions from the outer territories. One by one, star systems that had been secure for millennia were reporting the same impossible truth. Human fleets had appeared in their skies, and they weren't asking for surrender. The emergency session had been called at the speed of quantum entanglement, pulling high command members from across the Empire's core worlds to the heavily fortified strategy center deep beneath Vorthak Prime's mantle. Here, surrounded by layers of neutronium armor and protected by shields that could deflect stellar radiation, the Zathkari Empire's greatest military minds gathered to confront a truth that threatened to unravel 3,000 years of galactic dominance. Commander Beltar Naistak stood at the center of a holographic arena that displayed real-time intelligence from 17 different star systems. Each projection showed the same horrifying pattern: human fleets materializing from hyperspace, ignoring demands for surrender, and immediately engaging Zathkari defensive forces with a ferocity that defied all conventional understanding of space warfare. The Talmeth system fell 6 hours ago, reported Intelligence Coordinator Hexnal Vorthak, her usually composed demeanor cracking under the strain of delivering increasingly impossible updates. Admiral Kelthar's entire defensive fleet gone. No survivors, no distress signals, no tactical data to explain how a force 1/3 the size of our own could achieve total victory in less than 2 hours. High Marshal Kethavar Holneth's primary arms moved in sharp, agitated gestures as she absorbed the tactical displays. "Show me the engagement footage," she commanded, her voice carrying an edge that had cut through enemy lines for decades. The central hologram shifted to display the final moments of the Battle of Talameth. Zethkari battleships, massive constructs of living metal and quantum engineering, found themselves facing human vessels that seemed crude by comparison. The Empire's ships gleamed with the perfection of millennium-old design principles. The human craft looked like they had been assembled from scrap metal and desperate ingenuity. But as the battle unfolded, tactical superiority became horrifyingly irrelevant. "Observe their approach vector," Veltar said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen this nightmare before. Traditional doctrine would suggest they maintain optimal firing distance, utilize superior numbers, focus on strategic targets. The footage showed the human fleet doing none of those things. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the Zethkari line, their smaller ships actually speeding up as they took damage, closing to ranges that should have been mutually destructive. "They're committing suicide," High Councilor Zithmus Pelkorth observed, his ancient voice heavy with confusion. No rational commander would order ships into close-range engagement against superior firepower. "Watch," Veltar said simply. The human ships reached the Zethkari line, and something extraordinary happened. Instead of engaging in conventional weapons exchanges, the human vessels began ramming. Not desperate, last-resort ramming, calculated, coordinated kamikaze attacks that turned their entire fleet into guided missiles. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was revealed when the tactical scanners showed what was happening inside the human ships during their final approaches. Life signs were spiking, not dropping. The humans weren't dying in the seconds before impact. They were getting more active. Bioscan analysis from the wreckage showed massive doses of neural stimulants in the human crews, Intelligence Coordinator Vorthok reported, but not standard combat drugs. These were designed to enhance aggression while suppressing fear response and pain reception. They were literally turning their own crews into berserkers for the final seconds of their lives. High Marshal Holneth's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. "Even if they destroy our ships through ramming, they lose their entire fleet. It's strategically meaningless." "That's what I thought too," Veltar replied, "until I realized they weren't trying to win space battles. They were trying to clear orbital defenses for what came next." The holographic display shifted to show the aftermath of the space engagement. With the Zethkari fleet destroyed, human dropships began descending toward Talameth's major population centers. But these weren't standard invasion craft, they were conversion vessels, each one carrying technology that transformed human colonists into something that barely qualified as the same species. "They call it combat adaptation," Veltar explained. "Voluntary genetic modification performed in real time during planetary descent. By the time they reach the surface, the humans aren't quite human anymore." The footage showed the results. Humans emerging from drop ships with enhanced muscle density, modified nervous systems that processed pain as pleasure, and brain chemistry altered to remove concepts like retreat or surrender from their psychological vocabulary. "They're turning themselves into living weapons," High Councilor Pelkorth whispered, "voluntarily sacrificing their own species' identity for temporary military advantage." "Temporary?" Veltar's laugh carried no humor. "The modifications are irreversible. Every human who undergoes combat adaptation becomes something that can never return to normal life. They're literally sacrificing their future for the sake of a single battle." The implications hung in the chamber's recycled air like a toxic cloud. Species throughout the galaxy had developed increasingly sophisticated weapons, tactics, and strategies over millions of years of evolution, but none had ever considered sacrificing their own biological identity as a standard military doctrine. "There's more," Veltar continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I've been analyzing their communication patterns, studying their tactical doctrines, trying to understand how they think. And I've discovered something that should terrify every sentient being in this galaxy." He activated a new series of displays showing human communication intercepts from dozens of different battles across multiple star systems. The translations were rough, Human languages seemed to resist precise interpretation, but the meanings were clear enough. They don't see this as a war, Beltor said. They see it as evolution. Every battle, every sacrifice, every modification they make to themselves, it's all part of what they call becoming worthy. High Marshal Holineth leaned forward, her predatory instincts focusing on this new information. Worthy of what? Of survival, Veltar replied. Their entire species' philosophy is built around the concept that existence must be earned through constant struggle. They believe that any species, including their own, that isn't willing to pay the ultimate price for survival deserves extinction. The chamber fell silent as the assembled commanders absorbed the full implications of this revelation. Every other species in the galaxy fought to preserve themselves, their cultures, their way of life. Humans fought to become something stronger, regardless of what they had to sacrifice in the process. Show them the Darwin Protocol, Valtar said quietly. Intelligence Coordinator Vorthic's secondary arms moved in gestures of reluctance. Commander, are you certain? This information has been classified at the highest levels. Show them. The holographic display shifted to show the most closely guarded intelligence the Empire had managed to gather. A partial transcript of human strategic planning sessions recorded during the early phases of their expansion into galactic space. The translated text appeared in flowing script across the chamber's walls. Every species we encounter will force us to become stronger or eliminate us. This is natural selection on a galactic scale. We will adapt ourselves to meet each challenge, no matter what the cost. Those who cannot or will not make the necessary sacrifices will be replaced by those who can. This is not cruelty. It is evolution. The Darwin Protocol is simple. For every new enemy, we become something capable of defeating them. If that means modifying our biology, we modify our biology. If that means sacrificing our comfort, we sacrifice our comfort. If that means becoming monsters to fight monsters, then we become monsters. Humanity's greatest strength is not our technology or our tactics. It is our willingness to pay prices that other species consider unthinkable. We will become whatever we need to become, and we will never stop becoming. High Council Pelkorth's ancient voice cracked like breaking ice. They're not trying to conquer the galaxy, they're trying to become the galaxy's apex predator. And they're succeeding, Veltar confirmed. Every battle they fight teaches them something new about their enemies. Every modification they make to themselves brings them closer to perfect lethality. They're not just at war with us, they're at war with the concept of limitation itself. The emergency alerts that had been flickering around the chamber's periphery suddenly intensified, and new tactical displays began materializing with updates from the front lines. System after system reported the same pattern. Human fleets appearing without warning, engaging in tactically suicidal but strategically devastating attacks, clearing the way for ground forces that seemed to grow more dangerous with each planetary assault. The Vorthok colonies have just sent a priority distress signal. Intelligence Coordinator Vorthok reported, her voice strained. Human ground forces have been encountered using weapons that appear to be constructed from the corpses of their own fallen soldiers. The holographic display showed grainy footage from the Colonial Defense Forces, humans carrying rifles made from the bones of their dead comrades, wearing armor crafted from harvested organs, using ammunition that appeared to be loaded with genetic material that converted wounds into rapidly spreading infections. They're weaponizing death itself, High Marshal Holineth observed, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been admiration despite herself. Turning their own casualties into tools for continued warfare. The efficiency is remarkable, Veltar agreed grimly. Nothing is wasted. Every death serves the greater tactical objective. Every sacrifice multiplies their combat effectiveness. They've created a military doctrine where losing soldiers actually makes them stronger. The chamber's atmospheric processors struggled to manage the rising concentration of stress pheromones as the assembled commanders began to grasp the true scope of what they were facing. This wasn't a war in any conventional sense. It was contact with a species that had evolved beyond recognizable concepts of military ethics or biological limitation. There's something else, Veltar said, his voice carrying a weight that suggested the worst was yet to come. Something I discovered during my final engagement with human forces on Kepler 442b. Something that made me realize why I had to return to Corps Command and warn you all." He paused, gathering the courage to reveal the truth that had haunted him through months of sleepless nights. "They know about our homeworld," he said simply. "They know about Vorthak Prime." The silence that followed was so complete it seemed to stop time itself. "During the final battle, I captured a human officer, a young female who had been leading commando raids against our supply depots. She was dying from wounds that should have killed her hours earlier, but she was still conscious, still fighting, still trying to complete her mission even as her life functions shut down." Veltar's mandibles clicked involuntarily as he recalled the encounter. "I thought she was delirious from blood loss, speaking nonsense in her final moments, but our translators picked up fragments of what she was saying. Coordinates, navigation data, tactical assessments of our core system defenses. The holographic display showed the relevant star charts, with human intelligence estimates of Zuthkari defensive capabilities that were disturbingly accurate. She died speaking the names of our government districts," Veltar whispered. "The locations of our command centers, the residential areas where our leaders' families live." High Marshal Holineff's forearms moved in complex patterns of barely controlled rage. "Impossible. Our core worlds are protected by quantum encryption, dimensional barriers, thought shields that prevent unauthorized scanning." "They didn't scan us," Veltar interrupted. "They infiltrated us. For months, maybe years, human agents have been walking among us, learning our weaknesses, mapping our defenses, preparing for the final phase of their evolution." The chamber's emergency lighting began pulsing more rapidly as new priority signals flooded in from across the Empire. The outer territories were falling faster now, each defeat feeding information back to human command structures that seemed to adapt and improve with supernatural efficiency. "How long?" High Counselor Pelkorth asked, his voice heavy with the weight of civilizations. "How long before they reach us here?" Veltar looked around the chamber at the faces of commanders who had never known defeat, leaders who had spent their lives believing in the absolute superiority of Zuthkari civilization. With quiet certainty, he delivered the words that would end their world as they knew it. "According to the tactical projections in that dying human's mind," he said, "they'll be here in 73 hours. The holographic displays around the chamber suddenly flickered and changed, showing new data that made every warrior in the room understand that their civilization's 3,000-year reign was about to face the ultimate test. "In Commander," Intelligence Coordinator Vorthak added, her voice barely audible above the humming of overloaded processing systems, "there's something else we need to discuss. The human fleet approaching our core worlds, it's not just bigger than anything we've seen before." She paused, steeling herself to deliver information that defied all tactical logic. "It's bigger than mathematically possible. Their ships are carrying more mass than they could have constructed with the resources available in the territories they've conquered. Somehow they're creating matter from nothing, violating basic conservation laws to field fleets that shouldn't exist." The chamber fell into a silence so deep it seemed to echo from the heart of the planet itself. In that moment, every member of the High Command realized they weren't just facing a military defeat, they were facing contact with something that operated beyond the fundamental laws of reality. And in 73 hours, it would be here. The countdown to humanity's arrival had been marked, not in hours but in the systematic collapse of everything the Zuthkari Empire had believed about the nature of existence itself. As Commander Veltar Nostik stood in the primary observation deck of High Command's deepest bunker, watching defensive fleets position themselves around Vorthak Prime, he wondered if his species was about to learn that evolution had rules no one had bothered to explain. 72 hours had become 12. 12 had become 3. Now, as the first human vessels began materializing at the edge of the star system, even time itself seemed to be negotiating with forces that refused to acknowledge its authority. "Initial contact in 17 minutes, announced Fleet Coordinator Nextel Mortek, her voice struggling to maintain professional calm as she reported the impossible. "Human advance forces are emerging from hyperspace at coordinates that should be occupied by our outer defense platforms." High Marshal Kethvar Holneth's mandibles clicked in rapid, agitated patterns as she absorbed the tactical displays. Occupied space cannot be occupied by two different objects simultaneously. It's a fundamental law of physics. The humans appear to disagree, Veltar observed quietly. The main holographic display showed human ships materializing directly inside Zethkari defensive positions, their hulls literally merging with and displacing Imperial vessels in ways that made seasoned physicists weep. Some emerged partially fused with asteroid defense platforms. Others seemed to exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously, firing weapons from positions they both occupied and didn't occupy. "They're not just breaking physical laws," reported Chief Science Analyst Corfal Hessine, his voice carrying the hollow tone of someone whose understanding of reality had been shattered. "They're rewriting them locally. The space around their ships operates under different rules than the space around ours." High Counselor Zethimus Pelikorth's ancient voice carried a weight that seemed to come from the depths of time itself. "How do you fight an enemy that can change the fundamental nature of physics?" "You don't," Veltar replied simply. "You survive them, or you become something capable of surviving them." The chamber's emergency lighting began strobing as new priority signals flooded in from defense platforms throughout the system. One by one, the Empire's most advanced military installations were reporting contact with human forces that seemed to materialize from nowhere, engage with weapons that violated basic principles of energy conservation, and demonstrate tactical capabilities that suggested their commanders were operating with perfect knowledge of Zethkari defensive plans. "They're not predicting our strategies," Fleet Coordinator Morthek said, her voice heavy with dawning understanding. "They're reading them in real time. Somehow they're accessing our tactical networks while they're fighting us." "Neural infiltration," Veltar confirmed. "I've seen it before. The humans can establish direct connections with our command systems, not through technology, but through something that resembles technological telepathy. They're not just fighting our ships, they're fighting our thoughts." The main display shifted to show close-range footage of human boarding actions on Zethkari vessels. The scenes were unlike anything in the military archives. Humans moving through ship corridors like they had architectural blueprints, navigating directly to critical systems, and interfacing with Zethkari technology as if they had designed it themselves. "Watch their movements," Veltar said, pointing to a human soldier who was accessing a Zethkari command terminal. "She's not guessing at the interface protocols. She's not using translation software. She knows exactly which neural pathways to stimulate to access our ship's brain." High Marshal Holineth leaned forward, her predatory instincts focused on this new impossibility. "Our ship systems are based on quantum-entangled biological computers. No non-Zethkari has ever successfully interfaced with them." "The humans aren't interfacing with them," Veltar replied. "They're becoming them, temporarily modifying their own neural patterns to match ours, accessing our systems from the inside, then reverting to their original biological structure once they've accomplished their objectives." The implications cascaded through the chamber like falling dominoes. If humans could temporarily alter their biology to mimic other species, then no defensive system based on biological locks could contain them. No species-specific weapon could target them. No cultural or physiological advantage could be maintained against them. "They're not just adaptive," Chief Science Analyst Hessen whispered. "They're evolutionarily fluid. They can become whatever they need to become, whenever they need to become it." The tactical displays around the chamber suddenly erupted with new data as human main fleets began emerging from hyperspace. But these weren't the crude, ramshackle vessels that had been reported from earlier engagements. These ships seemed to have been constructed from materials that defied classification, hulls that reflected energy they had never been exposed to, weapons that fired projectiles composed of compressed space-time, defensive systems that seemed to generate protection by convincing reality that attacks had never occurred. "Fleet composition analysis is impossible," Fleet Coordinator Morthek reported, her voice cracking under the strain of delivering tactically meaningless information. "Sensors indicate the human vessels are simultaneously composed of metal, organic tissue, crystallized energy, and what appears to be weaponized mathematics." "Weaponized mathematics." High Counselor Pelkorth's voice carried disbelief that bordered on panic. "Projectiles that alter the structural equations governing target vessels," the science analyst explained. "Instead of physically destroying our ships, they're changing the mathematical relationships that allow our ships to exist. The vessels don't explode. They simply cease to have been constructed. Veltar watched the unfolding battle with the detached fascination of someone observing natural forces beyond comprehension. "They've learned to fight reality itself," he said quietly. "This isn't just technological superiority, it's conceptual warfare." The chamber fell silent as the assembled commanders absorbed the true scope of what they were witnessing. Every other species in galactic history had accepted certain fundamental limitations: the laws of physics, the boundaries of biology, the restrictions imposed by the nature of existence itself. Humans had apparently decided that such limitations were merely suggestions. "Incoming transmission," announced Communications Officer Velenith Krossic. "Source: Human Command Vessel. They're requesting direct communication with High Command." High Marshal Holineth's four arms moved in gestures of barely controlled tension. "Put them through." The main holographic display shifted to show a human figure. A woman who appeared to be middle-aged by their species' standards, wearing what looked like a uniform constructed from the condensed essence of starlight. When she spoke, her words carried harmonics that bypassed normal translation protocols and communicated meaning directly to the neural centers of anyone listening. "Greetings, High Command of the Zethkari Empire," she said, her voice carrying the casual authority of someone who had never needed to threaten in order to be taken seriously. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Adaptive Fleet. I understand you've requested an opportunity to discuss terms." "We have requested no such thing," High Marshal Holineth replied, her voice sharp with offended dignity. Admiral Chen smiled, an expression that somehow managed to convey both warmth and inevitability. "Your commander Nostik requested this meeting when he began sharing classified tactical information about our capabilities. We appreciate his honesty, even if he wasn't aware he was communicating with us." Every eye in the chamber turned to Veltar, who felt the weight of understanding settle on his carapace like a physical burden. "The intelligence briefings," he whispered. "Every time I shared human tactical data with Command, you were listening." "We're always listening, Commander," Admiral Chen confirmed. "Not through technology, through evolution. Every species that encounters us becomes part of our collective intelligence, whether they realize it or not. Your thoughts, your strategies, your fears, they all become data points in our continuous process of becoming." High Counselor Pelkorth's ancient voice cracked like breaking stone. "Becoming what?" "Whatever we need to be," Admiral Chen replied simply. "Today, we need to be a species capable of convincing the Zethkari Empire to make a choice that will determine whether your civilization survives the next phase of galactic evolution." The holographic projection zoomed out to show the full scope of the human fleet surrounding Vorthak Prime. The vessels filled space like a three-dimensional constellation, their impossible geometries creating patterns that seemed to exist in more dimensions than normal space could accommodate. "You have achieved remarkable things in your 3,000 years of expansion," Admiral Chen continued. "You've mastered 17 different forms of faster-than-light travel, developed quantum biological computing, and created weapons capable of sterilizing entire star systems. But you've done all of this while accepting fundamental limitations about what intelligent life can become." She paused, allowing her words to settle over the chamber like a weight that pressed against the very foundations of Zethkari civilization. "We don't accept those limitations," she said. "Every challenge we encounter forces us to transcend another barrier that other species consider permanent. War taught us to reshape our biology. Exploration taught us to rewrite physics. Contact with other civilizations is teaching us to evolve beyond the constraints of individual species identity." "What are you offering?" High Marshal Holineth asked, her voice carrying the weariness of someone who had begun to suspect the answer. "Evolution," Admiral Chen replied. "The opportunity to become something greater than what you currently are. We've learned to modify our biology, our psychology, our very existence to meet any challenge. We can teach you to do the same." The silence that followed was broken by Chief Science Analyst Hessen. "And if we refuse?" Admiral Chen's expression didn't change, but somehow the quality of light around her seemed to shift. "Then you remain as you are, and natural selection proceeds according to its usual patterns. The universe is entering a phase where adaptability isn't just advantageous, it's the only path to survival." Commander Veltar found himself speaking before he realized he had decided to what would we become. "Something worthy of survival," Admiral Chen answered. "Something capable of paying the prices that existence in an evolving galaxy demands. something that can look at limitations and see opportunities for transcendence. The tactical displays around the chamber began showing new data. Human vessels throughout the galaxy engaged in similar conversations with every major spacefaring civilization. The pattern was becoming clear: humanity wasn't conquering the galaxy through military force. They were offering every species the same choice: evolve or remain static in a universe that no longer supported static existence. How long do we have to decide? High Councilor Pelkorth asked. You're deciding now, Admiral Chen replied. Every moment you spend considering this choice is a choice itself. The galaxy is transforming into something unprecedented, and every species will either participate in that transformation or be left behind by it. The communication ended abruptly, leaving the chamber filled with the weight of decisions that would echo through millions of years of future history. Recommendations. High Marshal Holineth asked, her voice heavy with the burden of species-level responsibility. Commander Veltar looked around the chamber at the leaders who had guided Zaktek Kari civilization to the heights of galactic power. These were individuals who had never accepted defeat, never compromised their principles, never surrendered their dignity to external forces. I've watched humans transform themselves into living weapons, he said quietly. I've seen them sacrifice their own species' identity for tactical advantage. I've witnessed them rewrite the laws of physics to achieve strategic objectives. He paused, gathering the courage to speak words that would change everything. And I've realized that what I called monstrous might actually be the next step in the evolution of intelligent life itself. They're not becoming monsters, they're becoming something that can survive in a universe where being merely intelligent isn't enough anymore. The chamber fell silent as each member of the High Command contemplated a choice that transcended military strategy or political calculation. This was evolution itself, offering them an opportunity to become something unprecedented or to remain what they were and accept whatever consequences followed. The humans are right about one thing, Veltar continued. The galaxy is changing into something that will require adaptabilities we can't currently imagine. We can either learn to change with it, or we can preserve our current nature and hope that remaining static will somehow be enough. High Marshal Holineth's four arms moved in complex patterns that expressed both acceptance and resignation. Signal the human fleet, she commanded. Tell them the Zethkari Empire is prepared to discuss terms for evolutionary partnership. As communication arrays throughout the facility began transmitting humanity's first formal diplomatic contact with a galactic power, Commander Veltar Nostek realized that his species was about to learn whether evolution was a process they could participate in, or something that would happen to them regardless of their choices. The countdown to humanity's arrival had ended. The countdown to something far more significant was just beginning. Outside the chamber's armored walls, the first joint human Zethkari research teams were already forming, preparing to explore questions that would reshape the fundamental nature of life itself. What did it mean to be a species when you could modify your biology at will? What did it mean to be an individual when you could temporarily merge your consciousness with others? What did it mean to be alive when you could rewrite the laws governing your existence? The answers would come at a price that no previous generation of galactic civilization had ever been asked to pay. But as Commander Veltar had learned through months of nightmare and revelation, evolution had always demanded payment. The only question was whether you would pay it willingly, or have it extracted from you by forces that didn't negotiate with concepts like dignity, tradition, or the comfortable illusion that some things were meant to remain unchanged forever. In the depths of space around Vorthek Prime, human and Zethkari vessels began moving in formation patterns that had never existed before. Hybrid configurations that required crews capable of thinking in ways that transcended individual species' limitations. The war was over. The evolution had begun. And somewhere in the quantum foam that connects all conscious thought throughout the galaxy, something vast and patient smiled as it watched another species take its first tentative steps toward becoming worthy of survival in a universe that had grown tired of accommodating limitations.